All right, we are live. This is week 4 urinary system. Only 38 slides, so this is going to be a quicker one for you guys. Also, I'm feeling lively. Yesterday, that one was a little bit slow. It was not a very good stream. It wasn't one of my best, but let's hope that this is a better one that's easier to follow along with. So let's do this. All right. So this week is going to be about tubular secretion and reabsorption. So, just kind of for reference, get our minds back around the topic. Tubular reabsorption is going to be occurring in the nephron loop and the glomerulus, renal capsule, renal corpuscle, stuff like that. Wrap your mind around these words again because we're going to be using them again. They kind of left my mind, so. Tubular reabsorption and secretion. Filtrate must be refined into urine by tubular reabsorption, which is when filtered substances are reabsorbed from the tubules back into the blood. See, I'll have a photo here just to. All right. So tubular reabsorption. Here we got all this filtrate coming into the Bowman's corpuscle. It's going to go through the proximal convoluted tubule. Then it's going to go into the nephron, down the nephron loop, and that's when the tubular reabsorption is going to occur. So filtered substances are reabsorbed from tubules back into the blood. Tubular secretion is when waste are secreted from the blood into tubular fluid to become part of the urine. So there's an arrow going this way and there's an arrow going this way. Most filtrate materials are reabsorbed. Materials not reabsorbed become part of urine. Right? All right, so reabsorption and secretion within renal tubule. Kidneys form around 180 liters of filtrate per day, which is a lot of pee. In gallons, that is 47 gallons, but obviously we don't pee out 47 gallons a day. So most of it, I think it's, let's see, how much of filtrate? I think it's like 1%. Yeah, 1.5 to 2% of that is what actually comes out to be pee. So mostly everything is reabsorbed. Solutes are reabsorbed at various points in the tubules. So this is going to be the meat and potatoes of week 4, is remembering what is reabsorbed and what is secreted and at which point. So here we got a little example. But just some general patterns to pick up on now is that most everything being reabsorbed, most of it is going to occur at the proximal convoluted tubule. See how this box is so much bigger? And also most of what's going to be secreted is at the proximal convoluted tubule, which makes sense just because we know that the ascending limb of the nephron loop is primarily to make it salty. Okay, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. So as we remember, when we're going down, there's going to be a lot of water being taken out, and also, never mind. I'll let the slides speak for themselves, just because I'm going to confuse myself. Um, so yeah, so just before we move on, just take a mental screenshot of this and see kind of uh, what is going on, and just acknowledge that the proximal convoluted tube holds the most amount of stuff secreted and reabsorbed. All right, so mechanisms. Mechanisms include simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, primary active transport, secondary active transport, and osmosis. And that secondary active transport, as we have mentioned, is kind of like when, let's say I'm going to pump sodium through a membrane channel. uh, these are just random examples. I don't know if this actually occurs, but if I want to push sodium through a membrane with active transport using an ATP, secondary active transport would be like if a glucose was attached to that sodium, like just to make it easier to transport. So while the primary thing would be the sodium, the secondary active transport would be that glucose that's attached to the sodium. So if transport requires use of membrane channel protein, it is subject to specificity, which we know. Transport maximum, if we're using like a channel protein, there's a maximal rate of transportation if transporters are occupied. So this is how that looks like. We can go over this. And competition, similar molecules may compete for transporters, right? And that's when we're using membrane channels. And obviously, there would be a lot more competition and there would be limits to stuff if we're using proteins just because there's an X amount of protein, X amount of these proteins. So in simple diffusion, the molecule simply moves past the membrane. Facilitated diffusion, the molecule just requires a channel, but it's still free. It doesn't require energy. Secondary active transport is when two molecules are moved, one against its concentration gradient. The energy for this motion is provided by the movement of the other molecule. Right, so this would be like sodium would be providing the energy for the movement of glucose. In primary active transport, one or two molecules are moved against their concentration gradient. Okay. So reabsorption may occur between tubule cells or through them. So the luminal surface of the cell that faces lumen of the renal tubules. So here we have the lumen of the nephron on this side, and we have a capillary on this side. So the basolateral surface would be like interstitial fluid. The side on the side of the cell of the tubular epithelial cell that isn't facing the lumen, it's facing the outside, it's facing the interstitial fluid. That's the basolateral. All right, so different forms of transport are used for each surface, which makes sense, especially since from the previous video and from our previous lectures, we've been talking about how there's different forms of movement between let's say, the plasma and the interstitial fluid uses different mechanism for movements than the interstitial fluid has for intracellular fluid. So that should make sense. Different forms of transport are used for each one. Sodium reabsorption. So luminal transport. So across the luminal surface here, this is the lumen side. Oh, my cursor got big. How did I do that? That was cool. Luminal transport occurs via facilitated diffusion. So no energy input is required, which makes sense just because these tubular epithelial cells are very permeable. They're kind of made to make it easy. And the basolateral transport occurs via active transport. So and this is specifically for sodium reabsorption. So basolateral transport is active. Sodium ions are transported from low to high concentration. Sodium potassium pumps and basolateral surface. Right. So for sodium, we're going from the lumen on this side. It's going to be passive into the tubule epithelial cell. And then it's going to be active. All right. So with the use of sodium potassium pumps, and that's going to create a higher sodium concentration in the interstitial fluid. So reabsorption of glucose and water. Oh, and again, it's important to kind of get your vocab words together and in use, and just think about how this is reabsorption and not secretion, which is which is obvious, but it's just important to kind of tie these words into what you're thinking. So sodium symporters and luminal surface transport sodium and glucose into tubular cell. So that sodium and glucose analogy that I used earlier was something in my mind. I forgot about this. So sodium moves across basolateral surface on this side by sodium potassium pumps and glucose by facilitated diffusion. So amino acids are reabsorbed in a similar way as osmolarity of interstitial fluid, my cursor here, in blood increases, water reabsorbed by osmosis via aquaporins. All right. So now let's read this just for some more information. Sodium moves down its concentration gradient and brings glucose along. All right. Oh, we kind of see some more information about how on the basolateral side it's active transport because it's a sodium pump, so it's bringing in potassium in, it's kicking out sodium. So let's get back to the text. Glucose is at a high intracellular concentration, so it moves out of the cell and into the interstitial fluid by facilitated diffusion. All right. So symporters are just so we're kind of understanding each word. Symporters are transporters that move two things in the same direction. So sodium moves across basolateral surface by sodium potassium pumps. Okay. Amino acids are reabsorbed in a similar way. Huh. Okay. So yeah. Hmm. Oh, okay. I understand what this means now. All right. So glucose is being transported into the tubule epithelial cell with the help of this symporter here. So that's what glucose is about. And sodium, we have some more context now, is being put across the basolateral surface with a active transport by the use of sodium potassium pumps, which are going to bring in potassium into the cell and excrete sodium out of the cell. And glucose just gets by through facilitated diffusion. Um, and I guess this would also be a form of facilitated diffusion here too. Here you can see my cursor on the luminal surface of it, just because this doesn't require energy and it's still like a special form of a transport. All right, so and amino acids are reabsorbed in a similar way. So amino acids are going alongside sodium in the symporter and getting into the cell, and then are leaving through facilitated diffusion. All right, so now this part. As osmolarity of interstitial fluid and blood increases, right? Because we're going to make this area from the slide above, we're going to make this area a high sodium concentration area because we have a sodium pump here. That's going to make this fluid and the pericardial the blood pericardial capillary, aka the blood, it's going to make the osmolarity high. It's going to have a lot of solutes in that area. And what that's going to do is, since it's a high osmolarity, it's going to attract a ton of water. So it's going to attract a ton of water from the tubule epithelial cell. And to replenish the water from the tubule epithelial cell, the tubule, it'll get water from the filtrate, from the lumen. So since we want water here, we're going to take it from here And to replenish the water from here, we're going to take it from here. All right, so reabsorption of bicarbonate. Sodium hydrogen antiporter in luminal surface. All right, so let's locate that first here. So we got the sodium and hydrogen antiporter. Sodium going in, hydrogen going, sodium going out and hydrogen going in. Antiporter meaning in opposite directions, anti. In luminal surface, transport sodium ions into the tubular cell, right, into the proximal convoluted tubule cell, and hydrogen ions into the tubular lumen. All right, so this is gonna do something with pH. Carbonic anhydrase combines hydrogen and bicarbonate ions to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid dissociates to form carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide enters tubular cell and is converted back into bicarbonate for reabsorption. All right, so notice here how carbonic anhydrase is used to mediate both ways. How carbonic anhydrase is using carbon dioxide and water to make carbonic acid. So just notice that this arrow is moving both ways for this reaction specifically. All right, so, and this is for pH, which is not really mentioned here. So what does this mean? Why are we going in a circle here? This is which we talk about in the unit after this, week 5, is talking specifically about the renal regulation of acid balance. Renal regulation for acid balance. So the driving force behind this would be chemistry, just because simply the buffer wants to be used, as Sam tells us. So this is gonna introduce, we're gonna introduce hydrogen ions to increase P. We're gonna introduce hydrogen ions to increase the pH in the intracellular fluid in the tubule cell and in the filtrate, and this is all to balance out pH. This is what this is doing. That's why we're dealing with bicarbonate as well. So that should be a clue that we're doing something with pH. So yeah. Reabsorption and secretion. Most solute and water reabsorption occurs in PCT. Yeah, so proximal convoluted tubule. Hold on, I'm gonna drink some water. Most solute and water reabsorption occurs in the proximal convoluted tubule. All glucose and amino acids reabsorptions occurs in the proximal convoluted tubule. All right, so sodium, bicarbonate, and calcium reabsorption occurs here too. Sodium symporters provide energy for secondary active transport of glucose and amino acids. So this is just what we were talking about here. Symporters allow for sodium and glucose to be, and amino acids, because here it says amino acids are reabsorbed in a similar way. That's all we're saying. So don't think they're two different things. Sodium symporters provide energy for secondary active transport of glucose and amino acids. Diffuse through basolateral membrane after entering tubular cells. So glucose and amino acids, once they're inside of the of the cell lining the tube, it'll just diffuse. So, which we mentioned here, facilitated diffusion of the glucose, and amino acids work the same way. So there's an amino acid here too, which is doing facilitated diffusion. All right, so diffuse through basolateral membrane after entering tubular cells. Remember, basolateral membrane is the side of the interstitial fluid and not the lumen. Water passively follows solutes via osmosis. Right, and secretion of excess urea and ammonia and creatinine and acid. So let's since this aspect of this is basically the meat and potatoes of this week, let's just take a moment to write it down. I just feel like that's going to be the biggest the hardest thing of all this. So reabsorption is going to be glucose and amino acids, vitamins, lactate, urea, sodium, chloride, water, bicarbonate, potassium, calcium, magnesium. Did you guys hear that? Magnesium. What is PO4? Whoops. Phosphate. And secretion is creatinine, urea, hydrogen, NH4. What the hell is NH4? Ammonium. Ammonium. Ammonia. Oops. Ammonia. Plus drugs. All right, so now we got that done for proximal convoluted tubule. Let's keep on going. All right, so now that we're done with this, we're going to go into the thick portions of the nephron loop. And then we're going to go descending loop. All right. As water leaves a filtrate through the descending limb, the filtrate becomes more concentrated. Osmolarity is measured in blah blah. So while we're descending, we're going to make it more concentrated. And how do we do that? How are we going to concentrate osmolarity? We're going to take away water. So let's read that. Reabsorption and secretion of the nephron loop. So first we're going to do the descending limb, which contains aquaporins, which are special transporters for water. Since I remember that water is not lipid soluble, so it's not going to go across the membrane. So that's why we need aquaporins, which are like transport channels for water, especially for water. So yeah, they contain aquaporins for water reabsorption. Ascending limb actively reabsorbs solutes, ions. Uh, reabsorbs solutes, ions, especially sodium and chloride. Builds osmotic gradient for water reabsorption for the descending limb. Right, so we have aquaporins, but the aquaporins are still, they're not pushing out water. They still need the gradient to follow. They need a osmotic gradient. They need osmotic pressure, right? Because just because water can diffuse from within the lumen into the interstitial fluid doesn't mean that it will, because there needs to be a osmotic gradient. There has to be osmotic pressure. There has to be solutes here that attract the water. And that is what the ascending limb is doing. The ascending limb builds the osmotic gradient for water reabsorption for the descending limb. All right. Before I was trying to say, when I was getting confused, is that the ascending limb, this one, grabs a lot of water, but it's not, it's not that. It's actually the opposite. It's not grabbing any water. It's grabbing solids. It was the opposite. Builds. All right. So I'm just going to take a quick note of that. Just like drawings, mostly. Okay. So, counter current multiplier system. As filtrate moves through the nephron loop, solute pumps in a as filtrate moves through nephron loop, solutes pump in ascending multiply osmotic gradient to increase water absorption. Oh, okay. So what I just was explaining, how aquaporins aren't going to do anything alone. There needs to be a gradient, and the ascending loop is going to create that gradient. Here we can see that what is escaping here is sodium, and what is escaping here is water. This is going to make a gradient. This is in itself, this process is called the counter current multiplier system. As filtrate moves through nephron loop, solutes pumps as, yeah, okay, I already read that. Structure of vas erecta allows nutrients and waste exchange without disruption of osmotic gradients. Okay. So descending and ascending loop. Descending loop contains permanent aquaporins. Thick ascending loop is impermeable to water. Right. Epithelial cells of ascending loop. So now we're on to the ascending. Hold on, I'm just gonna take a quick. Okay, so this is really good. Nice and easy. What to remember? What is leaving the descending loop? It's only water. That's great for us. Referencing this diagram, I know some diagrams are going to be different. So chloride, sodium, and potassium. Chloride, potassium, sodium. Okay, cool. Let's get back. So the thick ascending limb transports solutes. Sodium chloride ions are transported into epithelial cells. Makes sense. Movement of chloride ions build up negative charge in interstitial fluid. Right. Because chloride is negative. Yeah. And a good way to remember that chloride is negative is because sodium is positive. Uh, because they remember from my previous video, chloride and sodium work together for the sodium potassium pump. But chloride, its only job from uh, the big six ions and electrolytes is to keep body fluids electrically neutral. So that's what that chloride is doing, is keeping it negative so we're not too positive. Movement of chloride ions builds up negative charge in interstitial fluid. Attracts additional cations, which are positive for reabsorption. So let's read this text. K potassium leaves by facilitated diffusion according to the concentration gradient. Chloride is pumped into here. And since this interstitial fluid is going to be negative because of all the chloride, it's going to bring in that potassium and sodium. All right, here's another thing to note is that urea is getting put in here. All right, so yeah, so the sodium is gonna get sodium and the chloride here is getting pumped out here, and it's gonna become very, uh, the osmolarity is gonna become high, and that's gonna bring out more water from the loop. And when that water gets taken out of the nephron loop, it's gonna become more concentrated, P, right? So yeah. Nephron loop filtrate processing summary. So let's do another little note. Loop. So for reabsorption, we got water. For ascending loop, sodium, chloride, bicarbonate, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And secretion is only going to be in the descending, and it's going to be urea. Which makes sense because in this arrow, we don't see any urea going here. In this diagram, we don't see an arrow for urea, only on the descending. All right, so the distal convoluted tubule filtrate summary. So looks like we don't have any notes about that. We just straight to the meat and potatoes about the distal convoluted tubule. So DCT, we got sodium, sodium chloride, so more ions, water, magnesium, and phosphate. So just ions are being reabsorbed, which makes sense because the thick ascending nephron loop was doing the same thing. So, and they're back to back, so that makes sense. And secretion is going to be hydrogen ions. NH4 is ammonia, potassium, and drugs. All right, cool. So a lot of the secretion stuff is urea. So far in all but the distal convoluted tubia, urea is being secreted. Um, hydrogen is also really common. Hydrogen ions and drugs are really common. And so is ammonia. All right. Most of what is filtered is reabsorbed. Most waste, uh, ammonia, drugs are secreted, not filtered. Why? Because those are toxic to us and those are waste. Darn it. Gosh, this always happens whenever I mess with that. Let's look that up though. Yeah, so uh, because we need nutrients and we don't need ammonium. All right, so let's return to where we were. Slide like 23. Oh, 21. The concentration of renal medulla allows the production of concentrated urine. So remember, because the thick ascending limb is taking out so much ions, the concentration of the osmotic gradient is going to be so high in the medulla, and it's going to concentrate our pee. So yes. So reabsorption and secretion of the collecting duct. So now we are onto here. Um, fine tuning via hormonal control. All right, so reabsorption varies according to physiological needs. Aldosterone aldosterone increases the number of sodium and potassium transporters in the tube, causes more reabsorption. Uh, huh. Yeah, so that's gonna make you more reabsorption of sodium chloride. Hmm. Okay, so I'll write that down. Collecting duct. aldosterone, more reabsorption of sodium and chloride. Parathyroid hormone, PTH, increase reabsorption of calcium. And note that this is by increasing amount of transporters or channels. So collecting duct, CT. So reabsorption, sodium, chloride, water, magnesium, phosphate, hydrogen ion, ammonia, potassium, and drugs. All right. 1% of filtrate remains after tubular reabsorption and secretion. So that's where that, we don't pee out 47 liters of pee every day. Only 1% of that filtrate remains. So small changes in percentages of ions or water reabsorbed during the process results in a big change in urine overall. So let's see that. Trace the flow of filtrate through the tubular system. Describe the changes made by each section of the tubule to filtrate as it moves through. All right, so I'm going to look at my notes here that I've been writing. So let's start at the proximal convoluted tubule. We're going to reabsorb all the glucose, all the amino acids. We're going to reabsorb vitamins, urea, sodium, chloride, water, bicarbonate, potassium, calcium, and phosphate, which is basically all the major players. We're going to reabsorb all of it. And what we're going to secrete is creatinine, ammonia, urea, hydrogen ions, phosphate, and drugs. Which again, we're kind of seeing the pattern now here of what's common, which will help simplify what we see later. So yeah. So counter, and then it's going to go through the nephron loop, which has the counter current multiplier system, which is going to take away all the water from the descending loop, and then the ascending loop is going to take away all these ions to create that counter current multiplier system. So in the descending loop, we're gonna reabsorb water, and we're gonna secrete urea. And in the ascending loop, we're gonna reabsorb sodium, chloride, bicarbonate, potassium, calcium, magnesium. Then we get to distal convoluted tubule, where we're gonna do much of the same, except we're gonna secrete hydrogen ions, ammonia, potassium, and drugs. And the collecting tubules is actually dependent on hormones like aldosterone, which will increase the reabsorption of sodium and chloride. And the parathyroid hormone is going to reabsorb the amount of calcium. But overall, the collecting duct reabsorbs sodium, chloride, water, magnesium, phosphate, and hydrogen ion, and secretes hydrogen, ammonia, potassium, and drugs. So homeostasis and control of urine and control over the formation of urine. All right. So it looks like only a couple more slides. Let's see. How are we doing on this stream? Can't even tell. So the renin angiotensin aldosterone pathway. So increases blood pressure to maintain a glomerular filtration rate. So so let's say the glomerular filtration rate, which is dependent on hydrostatic pressure on the glomerulus. Let's say it's getting low. There's not enough filtrate coming through. Since it's reliant on hydrostatic pressure, it would make sense that if we want to maintain that filtration rate, we should increase blood pressure. And the renin released by juxtaglomerular cells. Renin is released by juxtaglomerular cells when blood pressure is low, which converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1, angiotensin 1 converted to angiotensin 2 by the ACE in lungs. And angiotensin 2 causes vasoconstriction and aldosterone release. Aldosterone increases sodium and water reabsorption, which will eventually make the blood thicker and have more. And what I mean by that is have more volume, and which will increase blood pressure. Aldosterone is structurally similar to progesterone. So I'm just going to draw this here. So first we got liver, makes angiotensinogen. And then that reacts with renin from JG cells, which create angiotensin 1 after ACE from lungs makes angiotensin 2. An angiotensin 2 vasoconstriction and aldosterone release. All right. So the antidiuretic hormone is released by the posterior pituitary in response to high blood osmolarity. So it increases water reabsorption and promotes insertion of aquaporins in collecting duct. So I'm going to write that in my notes of collecting duct hormones. ADH, more aquaporins. Reabsorbed water leads to higher blood pressure. Natriuretic hormones secreted by heart in response to atrial stretch due to high blood volume. So this would be atrial stretch. A and P makes you more P, makes you want to pee more by secreting more sodium. All right. ADH does the aquaporin insertion. For sodium reabsorption, we got angiotensin 2. No, aldosterone does that. And angiotensin does vasoconstriction, and atrial natriuretic ANP hormone does increase sodium excretion. So let me check that out. Check my work. Yeah. Okay, cool. Research break. Let's not do that. So what else does the renal system do? We got vitamin D synthesis, synthesizes skin. Vitamin D is synthesized by skin in response to UV radiation. Most active form of vitamin D is calcitriol. Kidney converts precursor from skin to calcitriol. So the kidney is making that vitamin D precursor into calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D. Aids in absorption of calcium from the digestive tract. Yeah. Oh wait. Converts precursor from skin to calcitriol, which allows it to reabsorb more vitamin D. Erythropoiesis. So kidneys release erythropoietin in response to hypoxemia. APO. This can be another note as well. Parathyroid hormone. Okay, so 3 more slides. So I'll write a little bit of notes on about the vitamin D. Kidney converts precursor into calcitriol. Release EP. And distal convoluted tubes contains receptors for parathyroid hormone. So DCT has parathyroid receptors, meaning that the parathyroid hormones aims to increase calcium in the blood. The distal convoluted is going to respond to that, and it's going to help by increased calcium channels, which will allow for more reabsorption. Because these channels will flow outwards. Done. That is it. So